the summer of 2012, I took a job as an expedition canoe guide on the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, Quantico, southern Ontario. These are a massive wilderness area of lakes and land. I was working for the Boy Scouts, and we were based on Moose Lake on the US side. My job was to facilitate a fun and safe multi-day trip, anywhere from 7 to 12 days out. Most of that summer was typical, but one expedition in particular still haunts me as a result of what happened to us over those course of days. Here is the account in full. My crew was on the younger side. There were 9 of us total, the maximum amount allowed in a group per hour permit. There were 6 scouts, 2 adults, advisors, which were scoutmasters, and myself. They had wanted to do a 200-miler, but didn't have the physical ability to, so we had to amend our route. They were bummed out, so I decided to take them to a waterfall called Eddy Falls. It's pretty flat up there, so the waterfall is somewhat rare, but that decision would end up putting us in the path of something. We visited the falls and camped near it. That evening I had the boys working on the camp setup, while us advisors worked on the fire for dinner. I was collecting firewood in a big tangle of down trees, bush, and bramble. I could faintly hear the falls off to my left, when out of nowhere, I heard the most unearthly scream roar I've ever heard. It stopped me dead in my tracks, and I was frozen. The second scream was closer, and then the third closer. I couldn't see anything due to the thickness of the brush, but whatever it was coming directly at me. By the fourth scream, I could feel it in my chest. I got nauseous and involuntarily barked at it. I've never before or since heard that sound come out of my body. The fifth scream was almost physically hurting me, but it snapped me back to reality, and I ran back to the camp. My crew had heard it too, but what am I to tell them? I claimed it was just a boar. There are no boar up here, and the advisors knew I was lying, but didn't call my bluff. After dinner, they went to their tents and I retired to my hammock about 50 yards away from the camp. As a rule, I always set my hammock about head height, if I had to say, so about 60 feet up. I would use a tarp over my body and my head to keep the morning dew off and the morning mosquitoes at bay. But that tarp wasn't strung up. That's important. It was just loosely over me. It must have been around 3 or 4 a.m. when I was awakened by a sound that sounded like a crying woman. Not an outright cry, but a sob. At the same time, I'm hearing something walking through the thick brush down past my feet. So I listen, totally still and quiet, as it crosses into camp. I could hear the change from the brush to the granite rock, but could still hear heavy footfalls as it walked right through the camp and on towards me. At this point, the tarp is still over my head, so I can't see a thing, and I don't know what to do. In no time, it was standing right next to me. I could hear the breathing, loud and congested sounding. I could smell the musk. I could feel its enormous presence only inches from my body, just standing there. Time to make a decision. I suddenly threw the tarp off of my head, and as I did, my left arm touched this thing in the chest. It was dark, but I could make out briefly a very large, upright figure. The hair on it was long and coarse. The muscular build was impressive. Bodybuilder status in the pectoral region that I touched. It all happened in a second, and as soon as my head made contact, it bolted back into the brush with immense speed for these thick debris. By the time I got my headlamp on, it was gone. My crew had slept through it all, so I read until the sun came up and decided not to mention it. The next day we moved a few miles towards the base camp and camped on a small island. Campsites on the US side are designated by a fire pit and a grumper, which is a fiberglass toilet over a deep hole. We were just arriving and it was evening. One of the adult advisors needed to visit the grumper, so he walked towards it. About 2 minutes later, we heard him yelling, and he came running back to the camp, still pulling his pants up, and said that he had saw a gorilla run right in front of him. I asked if maybe it was just a bear, but he said absolutely not. That he'd hunted bear for years, and it was no bear. He said that it looked like a monkey, about 9 feet tall. At this height estimate, I'm imagining being back in my hammock. If I touched its chest, and I was about 6 feet off the ground, that puts the head close up to 9 feet. Was it stalking us? Was there more than just one? The boys are now scared. Time to mediate. I suggested night paddle. No one's sleeping anymore anyway. So we pack back up and set out for around 8 p.m. and paddle by headlamp for several miles. My plan was to get back onto Moose Lake and camp very near the base, so we could be the first crew off the water the following day. Moose Lake is connected to Newfoundland Lake by a small pinch and a channel. It's not very deep or wide. There's dark woods on both sides. We were right in the middle of the pinch when a rock the size of a basketball came flying out of the woods on the right side and narrowly missed the bow of the canoe I was steering. There's no cliffs there. This thing was forcefully thrown at us from the tree line. At this, we paddled like hell. We paddled to the center of the Moose Lake, tied all 3 canoes together, and we sat out there all night. With the sunrise, we paddled back to the base camp and ended our expedition. They did not want to talk about what happened, and I was okay with that. They left for Oklahoma the next day. After they left, I went to work a shift in the canoe yard, helping other crews load off. My buddy Justin got back that day from the trip, in the same area that we had been in, which was Bear Loop, and as I was helping him put the boat on the rack, I noticed that he had this distant look, almost a 1,000-yard stare. I asked him how his trip went, and he said that it was all good until they hit Knife Lake, Newfoundland Lake. He said that they were being messed with for 2 nights on Knife, and then had a huge rock thrown at them on the Newfoundland bench. Sure enough, for the solid 2 weeks after, the crews kept coming back from that area with very similar stories. One night there was a crowd of us guides in the staff lodge, swapping trail stories, and these encounters came up one after another. Screams, rocks, sightings of apes. Then in the back of the corner of the room, I heard a chuckle. It's one of the old veteran guides who'd been there for over a decade. All he said was, "It's about time somebody else saw one." I asked how long he'd known that they were there. He said that he's been encountering them for at least 10 years. Then he said, "They talked to me." This shocked me. Like a language? I asked. No, they communicate telepathically. The less you acknowledge them, the less they'll bother you. But they can read you, and they like when you're afraid. It's like a game to them. What happened out there is still a big question in my mind. I've always been open to the idea of Sasquatch. Their existence was never a huge stretch for me. But what really sticks with me is the way that veteran guide spoke of their intelligence and parapsychological abilities. That they can just read human emotion as clear as pages in a book. They know our species better than we know ourselves.
Hi all. This happened when my best friend was 17 and a half and I was 17 in 1996. My best friend Chrissy and I were both smaller females. She was 5'4" at the time and weighed 110 pounds, but was a soccer player, so very athletic and strong. I was 5'7" at the time, 125 pounds. We're both blue-eyed blondes and were often asked if we were sisters or cousins. There's a large reservoir on the outskirts of her town surrounded by a beautiful public park. We figured that we'd be fine to walk around in the park because lots of people go hiking there. I'd gotten some really good quality weed, and we were looking forward to finding a peaceful place to smoke out in nature. I had my pipe ready in my pocket, and we were stoked. We chose to go out on a Saturday. It was a beautiful, sunny day, and there weren't many people there. We parked our car by the reservoir in the mostly vacant lot that had 2 other cars. We did not see anybody when we got there. We walked around the water for a bit and then chose a trail to go up. It was about 80 degrees out, and we were sweating, but we had some water in our small day pack. As we got about a quarter mile or so into the trail, I started having a weird feeling. I looked at her and quietly asked, "Hey, do you feel something is off here? Everything's really quiet." Where there were usually crickets chirping and frogs singing, it was totally silent. She looked at me and said, "Yeah, I think so." And then we heard some crackling of leaves about 60 feet behind us, a bit to the left. We didn't see anybody at the time, so we continued forward. We were both getting pretty nervous, and we heard the crackling again. This time, a little bit closer. We still didn't see anyone. Each time that we would continue forward, we would hear footsteps a little bit more behind us. I thought that we were being stalked. There was a turnoff to the left which led to a clearing by a large rock, about 12 feet high, with large sturdy ropes anchored onto it to climb up to the top. It was part of a steep hillside off the cliff. The rope to climb was anchored to the ground as well, so that one could not move it. I told her, "We need to get up on that rock. We need high ground." She nodded and went up first with me right behind her. We flew up that rock, clinging to the rope tightly, going as fast as we could. When we reached the top, we turned around to see an older man, probably about 45, with a slighter build. He was wearing a jacket, jeans, and glasses, coming into the clearing. He was about 20 feet away. He looked at us with a cold, vacant expression. I got goosebumps looking at him. I shouted, "Hi, will you please leave us alone? We're trying to have some privacy here." He made no response, and with a blank expression, slowly started walking towards the rope, which led to the top of the rock. My friend at this point was really scared and asked, "What do we do?" I saw a large rock, about 8 inches and almost square to my right, so I grabbed it. I was surprised at how heavy it was, but my adrenaline was going, so I lifted it easily. I told her, "Look around for the biggest rocks you can find. Fast. Move them next to us, hold the biggest one. If the guy tries to come up, we throw them at him and hit him as hard as we can. Aim for his head." Fortunately, there was a sizable pile of rocks behind us to the left, like someone had made a ring to hold a fire on top of the rock and then moved them away. She brought a few over and held a large one herself. My friend and I stood close to the edge of the rock, holding our makeshift weapons. I looked down at the base of the rock where the guy was considering the rope. He looked up at us again, with very cold blue eyes and no expression. Then he reached his hand for the rope. I shouted loudly, "Do not come up here. If you try to come up here, you're going to get really hurt. We're aiming for your head with these rocks. Get the fuck away from us." I held the rock close to my chest so he could see it. My friend was next to me doing the same thing, and we had a pile of more rocks. He blinked his eyes and cocked his head a little bit, then released his hand from the rope and silently backed away. He backed to the edge of the clearing, backed through the brush, still watching us. And then we heard his crunching footsteps go back through the woods till we couldn't hear him anymore. We stayed on the rock for another 20 minutes, maybe a bit more, watching and waiting. There was no other way to access the rock except for the steep hillside covered with poison oak, so we didn't think that he'd try. Plus, we'd be able to hear him if he did. After we both didn't hear anything for another 20 minutes, we decided to make a break for her car. We threw several rocks down to the ground, Mine hit the dirt with a particularly satisfying thud. Chrissy went down first while I was keeping watch in case he came back. While I was scaling down the rock, she was holding a rock, getting ready to throw it full force if he returned. Fortunately, he did not. We each grabbed the largest rock we could carry, put a few smaller ones in our pockets for good measure, then headed back to her car on the trail, very carefully and quietly. The crickets were chirping again, so we felt that he had left, but we were still extremely cautious. We did make it back to her car without incident and quickly left. That was the last time I've ever hiked in that park.
Exploring abandoned houses has always been a hobby of mine that I share with my best friend Justin. Oregon is known to have a lot of abandoned towns, and in 2018 we stumbled upon one. It was filled with crumbling houses, churches, and various outbuildings. After looking in a lot of windows and stepping inside some of the safer-looking structures, we decided to check out one of the biggest and creepiest of them all. Walking inside this place immediately unsettled us. It was like walking into a scene from an apocalypse movie. Several bunk beds, ripped mattresses, couches, soiled, forgotten toys, deteriorating children's books, and more were all strung in this large, disgusting room. An entire wall of small cribs were bolted in rows. Justin and I both got really sad. It was like a forgotten orphanage, and it was similar to an animal pound. It was clear that we weren't the first visitors since the original residents up and left. There were graffiti all over the walls, broken bottles, and old destroyed microwaves. Thoroughly creeped out, we decided to head back to the car. We weren't even about 5 feet out of the door when this piercing noise came from right behind us, right in the middle of this orphanage room that we had just left. I can only describe the noise as 100 of rats screaming in torturous pain. It was coming from that stupid microwave, and it was loud. My friend Justin is definitely that type of person who would die in the horror movie, because he immediately went back in to investigate. The ancient appliance was smashed open, bent, and almost undecipherable, including the power cord, which had been cut and ripped out. There was no reason, no sense, or explanation in this blood-curdling scream coming from that microwave. Covering my ears and filled with a sense of intense fear, I begged him to get the fuck out of there. We hightailed it out of there through this overgrown woods-looking area, both white as a sheet and shaking. It was only when we put a few miles in between us and this dreadful place that we started laughing our asses off while walking back through the woods. Who the hell can say that they've seen a haunted microwave? I laugh about it even still. But the pure terror and sense of dread that I felt that day will always stick with me. Something was not right in that place. Now, before you leave the video, I needed to ask you to do a favor. Make sure to go check out The Darkest Hour, and make sure to let her know how much of a good job she did. I've been waiting for a while to do this collaboration, and trust me, I am so happy to have it. Make sure to let her know how much of a good job she did. Go check out her channel. I'm telling you right now, you'll like a lot of her content, if not all of it. Her link will be in the description, along with mine as well. Like my Twitter, my Instagram, everything like that is going to be in there. We've been talking for a little bit now, trying to figure something out. But it was definitely worth it. And my hat's off to her. A huge thank you to you, and thank you for doing such an amazing job. If you're new to this channel and you liked what you heard, or if you really enjoyed the video, make sure to comment down below. Make sure to like, comment, And once again, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. We're doing nothing but growing. We've got a lot of content and a lot more coming, especially for the channel members as well. There's going to be a video out on there very soon, if not the end of the week. So just know that. So if you would like to go check that out, make sure to go check out the channel members listings as well. But other than that, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one. God, my voice is like gone this time. Jesus Christ. Okay, love you, bye.